going to chat now to psychologist Honey Langcaster-James. It is that thing, no matter your view on the monarchy, it can just bring up so many feelings for people that they might have suppressed for some time, or, you know, it reminds people of things that have happened in the past. What would you say to them, Honey?
Yeah, what I would say is actually, whether you are pro-monarchy, anti-monarchy, one thing that is for sure is that everybody's interested in the Queen. Everybody has what we call psychologically, we call it a parasocial relationship, when we have a relationship with a public figure who we might not know in real life, but we know so much about them. We see them all the time in the media. We might know lots about their family, even their private life, as we've seen in recent years. And we do develop a real kind of relationship with them. So there is an attachment and there is a sense of loss, even for those people who perhaps don't count themselves as very royalist. They might find themselves quite surprisingly moved or overcome by emotion.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when you see lots of people grieving together, supporting one another, reminiscing, reflecting, even on this programme, there's been some such dear memories, lovely stories, which we often see around the time of someone's death, which again can be so moving.
Yeah. So can I ask you, just in terms of some practical advice for perhaps, you know, parents explaining it to children? We heard earlier Denise talking about her daughter Betsy, who's 12, and it's the first time she's seen, you know, experience grief. What would your advice be to people?
Well, I mean, children, obviously, it does depend somewhat on their age. So we definitely would recommend that you use kind of age-appropriate terms and language, but also go at their pace. Children are naturally curious. They will be hearing about this at school. They'll be hearing it on TV. They'll have questions. So be ready to ask their questions. Be open and honest, and try to avoid using terms like someone's gone to sleep or we've lost somebody, because children tend to think quite literally, and they might think, well, why don't we wake her up again? Why don't we go and find her? So it is important to try and be straight and clear with your communication. But then the other thing to think about is that sometimes for children, it can be quite scary to talk about death, especially if this is their first experience of it. They might worry about loved ones. They might worry about their parents. They might worry about themselves. So if your child seems anxious and worried, let them express their feelings. All feelings are fine. Make sure they feel like they've got a space to have those feelings. Don't dismiss them or say, oh, don't worry, because children will feel that as being maybe there's something wrong with my anxiety. And just let them sort of talk about it, and then try and reassure them, perhaps, you know, that we are well. Often people die when they've been unwell for a long time, and maybe the doctors haven't been able to fix their bodies anymore. Those kinds of terms can work quite well with younger children. But it does depend on the age.
Yeah. Can I ask a bit then about the other end of the scale? Perhaps if you're worried about a relative, an elderly relative, what are the kind of signs to look out for, and what should we be doing to help?
Well, I think there is a reality to the fact that for many of our older generation, they will have seen the Queen grow up. They will remember the Queen when she was a young girl. And that can be really emotionally challenging, because not only is it a real loss of a figure that for them has been a constant through their life, but it can also make us think about our own mortality as well, especially when we're nearing the end of our life. So one of the things I would say is, a little bit like during the pandemic, when we became aware perhaps of those elderly relatives or elderly people down our street who live alone, maybe now's a good time to send someone a little note or a card, or just pop your head around and say, how are you doing? Do you want a cup of tea? Do you want to chat? Let people talk to you, give them that space to support them. I think it's a bit early days to worry about people's grief at this point, because at this stage, people will have a full range of emotions. Some people will be very emotional, quite tearful. Others might even feel quite numb, quite indifferent at the moment. Others might even be irritable at this stage. And it's really sometime down the line, within weeks or months perhaps, whether someone really isn't coming to terms with a death or can't seem to move back into more normal life after the period of mourning, that we might consider whether someone really needs a bit of support. And there are lots of really great charities and helplines and things out there, both locally and nationally, that you can search for. I'll share a few links on my social media later on as well, that will actually give you good advice whether it's children or whether it's anyone who needs a little bit of assistance with grief around this, because the death of such a public figure, it really does have a deep emotional impact on some people. So we need to allow people that time to grieve.
Yeah, and letting people feel what they want to feel, as you say, honey. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks also, and thank you very much. Go on, John.
I was going to say, because this is where religion comes in. It can actually be quite helpful because it brings